Hi, welcome, welcome. I am Audrey with Lightspeed. We are trusted business agility advisors in the DC area and worldwide, virtually. I'm here with Lisa today. Lisa, you are live from Dallas, Texas. I love the little exclamation at the bottom. How's it going?
Going pretty well. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I am live from Dallas, Texas. I'm ready to get going. How about you?
Super. Yes, doing great. We are here for being an awesome agile manager. 20 questions about that. If you've not been with us before, welcome. We are so happy you're spending some time with us today. Anytime during Lisa's chat, you can put your questions down into the questions area. We'll be taking some questions throughout, lots more questions at the end. And yes, you are earning some continuing education credits if you need them today. One Scrum Alliance SEU, one PMI PDU, and a high five if we could, virtually. Uh, all right, so here we are. I'm Audrey and I will be watching the chat, so feel free to talk directly with me. And with that, I think, Lisa, let's hear about becoming or being an awesome Agile manager.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Audrey. And before we get going, how about you guys all in the chat put where you're calling in from? You could even put your title or what you do. Are you a manager? Are you a Scrum Master? Are you an executive? And let us know where you're calling in from so we can get a sense of our global audience here today. So I am in Dallas, Texas. It's a gorgeous sort of, fall here lasts about a week. And this is the week, so it's a gorgeous day here, just really enjoying the weather. But what I enjoy even more is talking with you guys about agile leadership. So a little bit about me. I've been leading teams for at least 30 years now. Got into agile in about 2012 and have been helping teams discover their best agile selves since then. As started out as a PO, then became a Scrum Master, then became a technical program manager, and have led several agile programs before I became a consultant with Lightspeed. And now I get to help lots of other people in lots of other industries be the best agile that they can be. And one of the key things that uh, tends to always be underlying any discussion of how we're doing change in an organization is with the managers. So lots of major org changes originate with middle managers, and they tend to be a lot more effective if you have that kind of person, that kind of ownership driving it. And part of the reason is because they're connected to the higher ups, but they're also connected more closely to the people on the floor. So they're a great pathway for communication. So getting your middle managers involved in any kind of transformational effort is key. And if you are a middle manager, that means that you have a tremendous role in doing a transformation. And then you also have a tremendous role as an agile manager. So as Audrey mentioned, I have probably 5 or 6 questions queued up myself, but I'm going to just speak to the first two, and then we will open it up for more questions from everyone on the call. And feel free to put those in the chat. And I think Audrey has the ability to unmute people if we need more clarification on that. So yeah, as I'm talking, go ahead and put your questions in the chat and we'll read through them, and Audrey will wrangle those as they come in. But otherwise, here we go. We're just going to go ahead and get started. So one of the main questions that I get when we come in to help teams is, what's my role as an agile manager? And that's not necessarily an explicit question. It usually is an implicit question that comes out about questioning roles and responsibilities, and getting a little stressed that if we're talking about self-organizing teams, there's no such thing as a manager in an agile world. Well, that's not true. We still need managers. We still need many levels of organization within the company. And managers actually become a lot more important. The key difference is the kinds of things they're doing. One of the things that a manager in an agile world is not is a person that tells other people what to do. So in an agile environment, that demands a leadership quality that allows you to see it's sort of a situational management context where you have to balance, you have to have sort of a bespoke managerial relationship with every single person who reports to you, depending on what they need and what their needs are. And this is the key part of being an Agile manager. Your primary role is to support the people underneath you. That can be as simple as removing roadblocks, but the more day-to-day kind of thing is really developing them as individuals. It's about personal and professional growth. It's about coaching. Your primary job as a manager now in an Agile world is basically to shut up and listen. You've got to learn how to hear what your people are saying and help them solve their problems, help them identify and articulate their problems, support them, lead them in a way that is not telling them what to do. We all know that, with kids or dogs, if you just, and I kind of group those together because I don't have kids, but I do have dogs. If you try to tell them what to do, it can be a little challenging sometimes because they sometimes need, just depending on what the situation is, actually just need the guidance. And if you have someone who's not quite sure what they need to be doing, you do definitely have to step in and help them a little bit. But what we need to do is pull away from this idea that a manager has to manage the work that other people are doing. Like, you report to me and you have to do these things, so I'm going to tell you, you need to do it this way, using these tools by this time. You've got to let people self-organize. You have to allow people to have autonomy and mastery and purpose. This comes from Daniel Pink, as well as many others, about how people are motivated. It's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. In other words, they have to have the freedom to make decisions. They have to feel like they're really good at what they do. And they have to feel like they're doing it for a higher purpose, something bigger than themselves. This is a three-legged stool, so if you're missing one of those, it's going to be a real challenge to maintain or create a high-performing team. As an Agile manager, your job is to make sure that those three things are in place for every individual in whatever ways are important to that individual. So being an Agile manager is much, much more about managing people as human beings and less about they are sort of parts of a machine that is churning out whatever work or whatever product it is that you're developing. So these are all key things to think about as an Agile manager, is becoming a listener, not telling people what to do, guiding and prodding if they need it, but they probably don't need it as often as you think they do. Your job is to build an environment of trust where people can come to you and be open and help you help them develop professionally and personally. So these are the key qualities of being an Agile manager. It's less about project management and it's more about sort of managing the souls of folks as they report to you on your team. I am going to pause there and see if we have any questions in the chat. Audrey, how are we doing on the chat? Does anybody have any questions about autonomy, mastery, purpose, situational leadership, becoming more of a coach and a supporter?
Not quite yet, but I think that was the trigger. So if you do have questions, now is the time to start typing them in.
Yeah, great. Okay. So kind of tied with this is, how do I enforce compliance with new ways of working? And I would just encourage you to think about your own sort of New Year's resolutions and how successful you generally are at forcing yourself to change your own habits. And it is infinitely more difficult to force other people to change their habits. And fundamentally, that's what we're talking about is habits, and the ways we do our work. You're probably not going to succeed if you go in with the mindset of enforcing compliance with ways of working. Take a step back and think about how you're going to get buy-in. And this is the key difference. You will have a very challenging time just telling people what to do. Oh, we're changing everything and this is how you have to do it now. What you can do, if you, as a person who wants to introduce some new ways of working, is do yourself and everybody else a favor. Find a place where you're going to be successful at it. Find people who are your supporters and who have a growth mindset and try it out there. Don't immediately start fighting the uphill battle with detractors. Start with people who are going to be on board. Start small, get some early wins, celebrate those successes, show that it works, generate that kind of buy-in internally, and slowly coming down and saying, you have to do this in a new way, oftentimes is going to backfire and you will wind up having people give you lip service about buy-in without actually being bought in. And if you have people who you feel like you have to enforce compliance with, a good thing to do is, again, to put on your new sort of agile manager hat way of thinking and get their input about what their resistance is. Obviously, don't call it resistance, but figure out what's motivating them and what the fears are, right? People don't like their cheese moved. People fear the unknown, and oftentimes it's just a question of talking through some things that maybe they don't quite have full visibility or insight into. It is rare in my experience that people are truly anti-change. It's simply a question of how this thing is presented. They're getting their own fears addressed, or even at minimum, just being heard. Like, yeah, this is going to be a challenge. That's okay. It's not easy. Change is not easy. It will become much more difficult for everyone involved if you try to force it. So again, listen to your teams. Start small. Start with people who are on board with it. This will generate a lot of buy-in outside of that group, and then you'll be able to grow it. Change does require bottom up and top down. So you do actually have to listen and figure out, well, what is motivating people? And here's a trick. Sometimes you will run into someone who just sort of is a holdout, and something that you can say to them, which very few people will say no to, is, okay, I get it. You're not comfortable doing this thing, or you don't want to do this thing. What do you say we try it for a little while? And if it doesn't work, I promise we can go back to the way we were doing things. If you have conviction that what you're doing is going to make people's lives easier, then this is basically a risk-free approach for you, because when people start to do things in a new way, they too will understand how it works. They will have their fears addressed simply by doing and having those things uncovered and gaining understanding, and they will very likely not want to go back to the way they were doing things. And there are very few people who will say, yeah, no, I don't even want to try it. So if you can put a short time box on it, 3 sprints, if you're using sprints, a couple of months, whatever it is, don't make it too long. Make it something that feels pretty comfortable for that person to commit to. Just okay, so are you willing to try this for 2 months? And then if it isn't working, I promise you we'll go back in the direction of what we're currently doing. So that is a great way to get people on board, because they have an out. They have a way to say, yep, no, this isn't working. I don't have to be fully committed to this, but I am willing to try it. So again, I'm going to pause there and see what questions we have in the chat. Please do ask questions. That's what I'm here for.
Oh, yes. So our first one is, what kind of books can you recommend, books or material for peer managers on this topic?
Yeah. There are a couple of books that I always recommend for managers just in general. One of them is The Coaching Habit, and that is a fantastic book. It's just what questions to ask, what order to ask them in. It's very hands-on. I'm terrible with names, so I've just blanked on the guy's name, and I'm in a different room, so I don't have my bookshelf right in front of me. So The Coaching Habit is one of them. If you are an Agile manager, that is probably the place to start. Either that or Simon Sinek is wonderful. You can follow him on Facebook, and he has a great, great, great book called Leaders Eat Last. And that is a phenomenal book that shows what true leadership is. In an Agile world, we're less concerned about management and we're more concerned about leadership. You don't have to be an executive to be a leader on your team. You can be a manager and just have a couple people reporting to you. What we're looking for is fostering not only your own leadership skills, but also finding and growing the leadership skills on the people who report to you. So we want you as managers to create a team of leaders. So Leaders Eat Last is a great one, and The Coaching Habit is a great one. I would start there. If you really want to get like classic business story type stuff, read Patrick Lencioni's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. This is all about how you build trust, and then how that leads to the ability to be open and honest, which leads to buy-in. So if you're really having trouble, if people aren't always forthright about their actual level of buy-in, then try Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It's a terribly written book. I will admit that, but I'm kind of a literature snob, so it's one of those like fables that is written to just basically highlight, bullet points essentially. Short read, everything I've just mentioned is a short read, and they're all good reads, but they're all very full of practical tips and what this actually looks like in the real world. So Coaching Habit and Leaders Eat Last, I think, is probably where I would start.
Perfect. And Omar, thanks for sharing the link. We went and put that one in the chat for the Coaching
Oh, great.
Habit.
Thank you, somebody, for him.
Went and grabbed the link. Next one, as we talk about soft skills, is how do you advocate for the soft skills in an organization that tends to just care about concrete results?
I think in some ways that depends on who you're advocating to. A lot of senior leaders will say, well, we can't afford to develop our culture in a different way. And the response oftentimes is, well, you can't afford not to. There is so much literature out there about happy employees being productive employees. If you have someone on your leadership team who doesn't believe that, ask for the opportunity to experiment in some small, low-risk way. Pick a team to try something on. I had the privilege to work at a company where we, as managers, it was part of our job to ensure that we had, I think it was 15 or 20% of our calendar to personal and professional development of the people who reported to us. So that meant one-on-ones. So having weekly one-on-ones, super key. Look, you don't have to have an entire organizational program about culture change to be an effective manager. What you're going to try to do, so don't tell your leadership team, what you're going to try to do is create a counterculture, a micro counterculture in your own sphere of influence. So, okay, so your executives don't buy into the fact that, high trust teams become high performing teams, or that the soft stuff needs to be focused on. Do it yourself. Have weekly one-on-ones for a half hour with every single person who reports to you. Hopefully that's not more than 10 people. If it is, then maybe do it every other week, but dedicate a chunk of your calendar to having one-on-ones with people. This is so critical for them to feel heard, not in a room with everybody else. So it's off the record, on the record, whatever they want. It is your gesture to say to them, you have my undivided attention for at minimum a half hour a week to talk about whatever it is that you want to talk about. Things that are good that are happening, things that are bad that are happening. This is a great way to build trust with individuals on your team. It's not about work, and that's the key I would say here. This is not about, here's your 3 things that you need to do next week, come back next week and we'll check off the boxes. This is sitting down for a half an hour as a person talking to another person and figuring out how you can be a better manager for them. This does not require wholesale organizational change. This simply requires you taking the initiative to take a half hour. And if your teams can't afford a half hour out of their week because they're so busy, then you probably have bigger other problems to solve. But don't sacrifice that half hour. I mean, if you think about a half hour out of if you do it every other week out of 80 hours of work time, that's a fairly small chunk. It's very low effort and huge rewards. You won't believe the relationships you build. And that's how you create an environment of trust on your own team, within your own sphere of influence. And then when your managers start asking you why you have such a great, high-performing, happy team, you can tell them. And then maybe you'll get some more buy-in and executive leadership from that. You don't have to wait. It's my point.
Thank you,
What other questions?
We've got quite a few coming in. I would like this one to be answered next. Can we say that an Agile manager needs to have different leadership styles? Is servant leadership the dominant style?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk in the Agile community about servant leadership. I think most people don't actually know what that means. Some people think it simply means that you're always leading from behind in the real world. Now the actual servant leadership is about it has some very Christian influence. So if you think about where this idea originated, think about it as sort of a Christian servitude type thing. That's where the term servant leadership originated. I think when most people are talking about it in an agile world, they're maybe not even aware that that's where it came from. And what they're trying to imply simply is that you are not directive. It is not a command and control type of leadership, and that you are there simply to support your teams, which is mostly true. Because sometimes the best way you can support someone on your team, if you think about situational management or situational leadership, you do actually have to tell them what to do. Not everybody is competent enough and committed enough in high combination together to just be let loose to do stuff. Oftentimes the best way you can support someone is to provide some structure and framework. It just kind of depends. And that's what I mean. You have to create a bespoke managerial model for every single person on your team, because people are going to have different needs. You're going to have some highly competent, highly committed people that you can just let go. And that's the true, like, hey, you know what? Here's the problem, solved. Call you in a month. Let me know if you need me, right? Other than your weekly one-on-ones, naturally. And then you're going to have people who are going to need a little more guidance, and you're not doing them any favors by not providing that. The key with agile leadership is to be sure that you understand the difference between those two ends of the spectrum and who needs what, and then figuring out ways to, sorry, I just got a message to reboot my machine, which I don't think we want to do, and then figure out ways to support that person in the way that they need. How much discipline do they need? Nobody likes a micromanager. You can provide direction, and you can provide guidance, and you can provide, you can kind of in some sense tell people what to do if you want to use a very crass phrase for it, but you can do that without micromanaging them. You have to help them grow. You have to help them learn to make mistakes. And I think that's the key, is standing back. I mean, really, the fundamental way to be a successful agile manager is to hire good people and get out of the way. We've all heard that before, but that is super duper key. You've got to step back. You have to let your team make some mistakes, or they will never learn. Again, much like dogs and children, they have to know that they can make mistakes and they're not going to be punished for it. But that's the only way they're going to learn. And so you have to get really comfortable with that as a manager. And if you're not, you've got to get there, or you're going to have a really hard time in an agile organization. Your teams are going to have a really difficult time making that change if you can't let go. If you find yourself to be a micromanager, work on that.
Lisa, how do you find and grow these agile managers? So the question is, how do you interview for folks with soft skills that can help groom them into these type of leaders?
Well, things, there's behavioral interviews are perfect. These are kind of like STAR format questions: situation, task, something like that, action and result. I forget what it is. There were so many acronyms, I can't keep them all in my old head. But yeah, so these are questions where you're actually trying to get at who the person is as an individual. You're looking for people with a growth mindset. You don't want people who are just stuck in the way they do things. You're also going to want, so there are, and you will have to figure out for your organization what makes sense, but there's two kinds of leaders. There's more than this, but just in broad categories. They're the people who are who love change. I love being in an environment where everything is completely freaking chaotic and I have to go in there and fix things. I love helping people see the light at the end of the tunnel, or providing some kind of direction in a dark world of chaos. That is where I thrive, and I love it, and I excel. I would be terrible as a person who is just in maintenance mode. I want something new every 6 months or whatever. So you have to adjust the kind of person you're hiring for where you are in your organization's life cycle. So if everything is hugely chaotic and you're going through lots of transformation and lots of change, and maybe you're moving from waterfall to agile, or you're pretty agile, but everything's crazy and changing, maybe you've just gotten acquired, whatever it is, if you're in that kind of environment, you're looking for a much different personality. The other half of managers are really great when all that's behind them. And now they're just here to, they're in more of a maintenance mode where things aren't super crazy and everything's not changing every day. And that's where they excel and they thrive. So you've got to, whatever questions you craft, you have to ascertain which kind of environment that person likes to be in. So those are things to look at, very much behavioral oriented questions. Here's a question I asked in an interview, and you guys can tell me if you would freak out if you heard this from an interviewer, but I have asked before, okay, think of the person, in your history of working with people, who is your least favorite person? And tell me one thing about them that they do better than you do. This freaks people out when they hear it in an interview. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm simply trying to see how they're going to react to this. Number one, do they admit they've worked with people who aren't so great to work with? And if you haven't, you're either lying or you haven't been on the job for very long, because we all have people who are not that much fun to work with. And then to see how they reacted. And you can tell if someone takes a very, very, very long time to think of how this person that they don't particularly like does anything better than they do, probably not an emotionally mature person. So you're looking for high EQ, high emotional intelligence, high empathy, high ability to react in a kind and compassionate way to situations which might not always be comfortable. So behavioral interviews really are the only way to get at finding those people. And you'll still be wrong. You'll still let some folks through the door that you're going to be like, but that's okay.
All right. I think we've got two more, and then we'll go to Lisa's next question if you're someone wondering when that slide deck is going to move. So, Lisa, we have our Agile managers, things are going well, but what do you do when the employees aren't performing in a timely fashion?
The first thing to do is to figure out why. Do your root cause analysis, do a fishbone analysis if you need to, do the 5 whys. These are all, so this isn't happening because that's broken. Well, why is that broken? Well, it's because XYZ happened. Well, why did that happen? Well, it's because our tool is 500 years old. Why is our tool 500 years old? Well, because we, whatever. So you just keep going back and back and back and figuring out what the challenge is. I mean, look, people want to do a good job. People want to deliver. If you've ever looked at a Scrum team's velocity chart, you will see that they tend to overcommit. It's because they're excited and gung-ho about solving problems for the company. Nobody wants, well, with the exception of probably 0.1% of the people want to perform well. They want to get stuff out the door on time. They want to deliver. They want to work hard, and they want to feel fulfilled that they've gotten things done. So if they're not doing all of those things, the problem is probably not with them. So it's a real tough question to ask as a manager of what you yourself can do better and what problems can you resolve, and what's happening that you're not seeing that is causing people who, I mean, believe me, people genuinely want to work hard and get things done. And if they're not able to do that, figure out why, and then figure out ways to fix that. And
Perfect.
again,
Okay, one more.
go back to your
Yes.
one-on-ones. It's going to be very helpful, right? Nobody should ever be surprised in a performance review. You should have these conversations every week or every other week with everyone who reports to you. So you will find oftentimes that performance problems are not performance problems. There may be stuff going on at home, for example, that you have no insight into because you've never talked to them. So and I say that because not to imply that maybe that's happening with you, but because it's actually happened with me. And that only came out because I had a high trust relationship with this person in our one-on-ones. So, and then that will definitely change how you approach these things.
Perfect. And we've got a follow on there that we had in our description. What metrics do I use to measure individual performance? And
Yeah.
do I measure individual performance? Are we getting there? Do you want to answer that now?
That may be the next slide. Hang on, let me get back to my, how's that?
Hello. Thank you, Andrew. That was the perfect transition.
So let's just stop there. So what are the best metrics for measuring individual performance? In an agile world, we don't put a whole lot of emphasis on individual performance. So I'm going to take a step back and just talk about some metrics that we often see for engineering teams, for example. Lines of code, we don't measure that. Number of stories that an individual is assigned to or has completed in a sprint, we don't measure that. The reason we don't is because for us, a Scrum team is a team. They together are getting work out the door. They're working with the business to figure out what value are we going to deliver to the customers and how. And delivering that value to the customers is the key metric that anybody in an agile world should be looking at. We thought we were going to make their lives easier by X% or whatever it was. And did we do that or not? Those are the things that you should be measuring. The other thing that you could measure for the Scrum team itself is their predictability. So, and that's more like, we said we would complete this during the sprint, and I don't care if you use, story count if they're nice and small. Please have them be relatively uniform in size but small, or you use story points. But the key is, if I'm committing to delivering 100 story points this sprint, am I getting all of these stories to done this sprint? And you should be looking at, north of 90% there, so that the teams become very predictable. Predictability measures are going to be key for you. And then another one that drives directly to quality is like a first time right type metric. So you can say, how many times did this get bumped back from QA back to dev? So those are, at steps in the whatever steps you have in your workflow. It's always good to measure how many times did it go left or go backwards in the workflow, because that will let you know that things are getting sort of pushed forward without maybe quite the eye on them that they need to maintain quality from, sort of the beginning of the process here. Individual metrics, you always have to be careful with metrics. You will get whatever you measure. So in an agile team, what we are looking for is leadership skills. We are looking for teamwork. We are looking at a growth mindset. We are looking for all of these soft skills that we've talked about. It is not about the number of lines of code that you've written. It is not about the number of stories that have been assigned to you. If you start putting those kinds of metrics in place for individual, let's just imagine two scenarios. We have a scenario where we're measuring number of stories assigned to a person that gets through the sprint, and we're using that as some kind of weird proxy for productivity. And so if we say, we want you to have the highest number of stories, assigned to you, and you're being basically measured on, hey, I have to deliver 12 stories this sprint or whatever. What you're doing is driving individualism. And on an agile team, we are driving teamwork. We are moving away from individualist stuff. So imagine a scenario now where you will reward then the individual who is just, heads down, not helping anyone, got all the stories assigned to them, is just cruising through the backlog, versus the other person who is making sure that maybe more junior devs have the guidance that they need, who is helping other people get their work done, who is providing knowledge transfer and support and is pitching in as a team member, who even walks over and does some QA because they have a little gap and they see that QA's queue is absolutely huge. So they go over and help QA. That person doesn't have any stories assigned to them, but that's the behavior that we actually want your team members to see. So whatever makes sense within your organization, you've got to get metrics in place that will have people demonstrating the behavior that you want to see on an agile team. This isn't about individual performance. 360s, bad idea. Stack ranking, rating people on numerical things can be very, very, very challenging, and it is not going to drive the behavior that you want if you want a high-performing agile team. So you've got to have the team metrics in place, because that will drive the team to work together. It's not about what any single person does. Did I answer that question fully? I know we've had some other ones that came in email, and I think that was pretty much what I wanted to say about measuring team. Program performance. So you can measure program performance, again, as I mentioned in the beginning. Whether you deliver value to the customer or not is pretty much what you need to be looking for. You may not even have those metrics in place to know that once we go to prod, this is the other problem, is that most people, like, once it's out the door, it's like, okay, forget it. We're never going to look at it again. I mean, like, it's done, it's out the door. So we're not even going to go measure and see if we made the difference that we wanted to make the difference to, justify doing that work. We simply just put it out there and hope for the best, and nobody ever measures anything. If you're in one of those kinds of companies, get whatever tooling you need in place to go see if you actually wound up changing the behavior in the positive way that you hope to change it by doing this work. Those are your performance metrics for your program or your portfolio, is about how much value did we deliver to the customer? Did we move the needles that we wanted to on whatever our OKRs or our key results or our KPIs or whatever framework we use? Did we move the needle, and by how much? Those are the metrics that you need on sort of the portfolio program level. And then on the team level, it's I think predictability and sort of quality in terms of first time right is beneficial. Lead time is important. If you're in a Kanban system, definitely want to look at lead time, or actually cycle time, which is when we pick up the work to when it's done, how long that takes. And you hopefully would see that decreasing. Any other questions about that?
Since you said Kanban, this may not be so much Agile Manager topic, but we do have a question that I work with a team that primarily does operations and maintenance related tasks. These are not often related to ongoing projects. Should we still confine our tasks to sprints or work within a looser Kanban style approach?
That 100% depends on your team's agility and not by their own standards, because we talk to a lot of teams who are like, oh, we're agile, we don't need any structure. And that is actually oxymoronic, because agile requires structure. It requires discipline. It requires baselining and metrics and investigation to, are we improving our process? It requires firm adherence to WIP limits. So if you have an extremely agile, extremely highly mature agile team who is incredibly disciplined, able to manage their backlog, able to respect WIP limits and understands lean, then yeah, Kanban's a great approach for that kind of work. If they're not there, I would start with Scrum. So get that muscle memory going, understand why it's important to have some discipline, because then you have that 2-week time box rather than WIP limits that will help people manage their work the way the work is flowing. And then when they're really good and they really get it, then maybe take a step towards Kanban. I'm not a huge fan of Scrumban. I think that just muddies the waters. I kind of think the level of agile maturity is Scrum, Kanban, Scrumban, and a lot of people do that in the reverse order. But Kanban will likely fail you, even on that kind of work, if your teams are not incredibly aligned on what it means to be agile and how Kanban works. A lot of people just want to do Kanban because they think it means that it's just less overhead, it's less process overhead. And that is not a good enough reason to do Kanban. So yeah, works great. And that's a perfect situation to do Kanban in for agile teams. But just beware of the teams that aren't quite as agile as they think they are, and maybe provide some discipline around that first.
Wonderful. What advice would you give a PM, waterfall PM, who is becoming a Scrum Master, Agile Scrum Master? What should they do differently?
There's actually, in my view, some of the best Scrum Masters I've ever worked with were PMPs, and that is because they kind of get it. They get the importance of having rigor, and they're not sort of kumbaya coaches, right? Where you just sort of swirl around and everybody does whatever they want because hey, we're agile and there's no rules. I personally prefer to err on the other side. The key difference here is that as a project manager, you are in some sense. Let me put it this way. There is not a whole lot of difference between a truly great project manager and a truly great Scrum Master. Both of them have buy-in from their teams. Both of them have some kind of time frame, so whether it's sprints or whether it's the whole project, that they are helping teams make sure that they achieve in one way or the other. Both of them are tracking to make sure that process is happening and that it's happening correctly, and that the teams are delivering and that they're on schedule and on target. So but without telling people what to do. Truly great project managers also don't tell people what to do. So we talked about that before. Scrum Master is not a command and control kind of a position. And I've heard a lot of people sort of, talk about project management as if that a good project manager is a command and control person. That doesn't work either. Neither position should be command and control if you want to be really good at it. So you have to be sort of you have to be a leader on the team without having the title. You have to be a center of gravity for the team. You have to be the person that they trust and will go to. And because they trust you, they're happy to hear from you that like, hey, what do we need to do to get a little faster? Or like, we're falling behind. What can we do to work through this? These are all things that are completely common between a Scrum Master and a really good project manager. The key difference is that if you come from an environment where project management is equated with, you will report your progress to me, we're having a red, amber, green status every week, I want to use Gantt charts, so we're going to plan this all out for a year in advance. These are all things that will sort of fall down in an agile environment. So the key difference is to step away from being the person that people are giving their updates to, because you are not in that role as a Scrum Master. You're there to help remove roadblocks if you need to, but teams aren't giving updates to you as a Scrum Master. You're still helping them and supporting them, and if they are having challenges of getting work out the door, helping them figure out why and helping them fix that. But you're really working closely with the product management piece of the organization to, and they're the ones who are going to be interested in the updates and reporting out to the company, usually because it's kind of it's their feature, right, that they want to see in the customer's hands and delivering value. So they're usually the more interested one. So not command and control. You're not the person that people are providing their updates to. And there's nothing that says you can't use some project management stuff in an agile world. I always advise people use the tools and the language that are native to your organization if you're going through an agile transformation, because it'll be more comfortable. Avoid the jargon, use the tools you've got for now, just to get started, and then you can start slowly make that transition to, really diving full on into agile jargon and doing everything completely differently. Don't start there.
All right, let's do another one. I think maybe we're looking at the clock. We booked 45 minutes here, but Lisa said she could stay just maybe a minute over with a couple more questions. So Lisa.
I'm free till the hour. So.
Till the hour? Okay. Should a manager and coach be separate people, or should manager act as a coach?
Any manager, I don't care if you're in an agile organization or not, a huge 95% of your job should be coaching your teams. That's what you're there for. You are there to ensure that your teams are happy and healthy and high performing. A lot of people think that means you just kind of like drive them towards metrics or drive them towards being busy and doing work. And that's not how it works. If you truly want results, you have to be a coach. You have to be a listener, because that is the only way you're going to create happy, high-performing teams. And only the happy, high-performing teams will deliver in the way that's needed by the business. So yeah, I don't care whether you're what kind of organization you're in. If you want to be a successful manager, you have to be 95% of what you do has to be coaching the teams and supporting the teams in the way they need to be supported. If you have an agile coach on hand, they don't have to be a manager. In fact, most agile coaches that I work with actually don't have anybody. They're ICs, they're individual contributors. They don't have anybody reporting to them. Sometimes Scrum Masters report to them, but agile coaches really are there organizationally to make sure there's alignment about whatever your agile best practices are. They're the ones who are coaching the Scrum Masters, so they have more experience than the Scrum Masters in agile stuff. And so they're there to provide additional insight. Sessions like this, for example, from their own experience about helping the coaches, the coaches are helping the Scrum Masters coach their teams towards better agility in the organization. So an agile coach doesn't have to be a manager. Oftentimes they're not. So that just kind of depends, but it's okay if you're both.
Okay, well, we will now really open the Q&A forum. Not that it hasn't been open the whole time, but before folks are running to the next meeting, Lisa and I would love to spend more time with you this week, and Thursday at the DC Lean Plus Agile meetup is a great opportunity. So we will be talking maximizing business value. I'm going to put that link in the chat if you want to click it. If you want to spend even more time with Lisa, she runs some free virtual coaching circles, and it's a really great community there that can help you with lots of questions and challenges, and come to offer your own advice as well. So I'll stick a link to that in the chat. The next one is November 18th. So you just sign up on the form and I'll get you the invite.
Yeah, it's a lot like this, except I don't talk as much. It's a bunch of, usually there's 20 to 25 people in there with varying levels of agile expertise, and all I do is broker the conversation. I don't talk very much in there. Well, I talk, but not quite as much as this. Mostly you'll hear from other people's perspectives.
Yes, and if you're dying to see what I look like, Thursday I will be on video. So moving back to some questions. Thank you so much for being here. Some folks you may need to run, if not stick around for a while. And Lisa, yes, stay safe. Have a great week. There's one question that's been sitting here from the last slide, but it was a question, can you share some examples of new ways of working? Because you had mentioned on the last slide, it said, ... in new ways of working.
Oh yeah, so I was not trying to be very specific. I mean, that is, you might hear that from disciplined agile delivery. They use that as ways of working. You're wow. I wasn't using it as jargon. I was simply talking about if you're changing the way you're doing things. You might change your tooling, you might change your process, you might be introducing longer sprints, shorter sprints. You might be changing how you're writing the stories or acceptance criteria. I mean, just whatever those little changes are. That's all I meant. It wasn't weighted with a bunch of disciplined agile delivery, concepts behind it. It was simply a change to the way things are happening in your organization.
Great. It looks like we've got one more question. So if you don't get your question in the next minute, we'll make this our last one, Lisa.
Sure.
It is.
Great fun for me. I hope it was helpful for you guys.
Always is. Lisa, how do we know, this is interesting, how do we know when an organization should move to SAFe from Scrum? Let me let you unpack that one.
Yeah, so I can sort of give you the SAFe ideas, either that, you just decide that you want to do it or you're on a burning platform. So from SAFe's perspective, you are, sort of crashing and burning and you've got to do something. And so you choose to scale. But, there's a point at which communication breaks down. And, you may have started with 3 or 4 Scrum teams on a program, and you may have kind of figured out how to make sure that information is flowing, that there's visibility, that there's, dependencies are noted ahead of time, and things don't tend to, bite you in the butt when you start working. If you've got all of that in place, then, there's always a trade-off. There is overhead to adopting any framework, whether it's SAFe or any other framework. There is definitely overhead to doing that. Even beyond sort of the initial phases where you're training everyone on how to do it, there's just the day-to-day overhead of having those scaled meetings and having all of that sort of fractal, feeding up of information from layer to layer to layer. There's overhead involved with that. So there's going to be a point, though, where you'll notice that you have lots and lots of conflicting priorities coming to a team. You'll have lots and lots of rework because requirements aren't clear, or things are coming in from the side and teams just kind of can't ever get their sea legs because they're constantly context switching. They're constantly getting divergent directions from across the business. They have to wait 3 weeks for someone else in another department to do one piece of work that they have to do. So if you notice that all of these things are happening, it's time to start thinking about. And remember, scaled agile isn't only about communication, flowing information and work across multiple teams. It's also about how those teams are constructed and how your organization is constructed. So if it's not working, if you notice that you have lots of silos, either in the business or functionally, then yeah, and it's slowing you down. If you notice that there's lots of delays in your process and lots of rework in your process in your multiple teams, it's probably a good idea to take a step back and think about what framework makes the most sense for you. There's plenty out there. SAFe's a good one. Less is a good one. Disciplined Agile Delivery has a scaled version. So it's about understanding how the work is flowing. And when you get multiple teams, that tends to compound exponentially. And if you find yourself in a place where you've got lots of delays because of that, then it's probably about a year or more past when you should be going for a scaled framework.
Okay, so Lisa, I think we're going to end it there. We've
Great.
wrapped up the questions. It was our pleasure to have everyone here today. And Lisa, you have the closing word. Pressure's on.
Oh gosh. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Do keep follow us on LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm the only one with my name, so you're welcome to use my Lightspeed email address if they ask you for it. Do connect with me on LinkedIn. That'll keep you up to date on what's happening at Lightspeed. Also, you're welcome just to reach out and ask me questions on LinkedIn. That's also good. So definitely do that. And I will say we're going to be getting more and more of these on the calendar. So do stay tuned, and we hope to see you at another one.
Thank you so much.